Spider-Man Miles Morales initially launched on PS4 and PS5 2 years ago, and there was something special about web swinging through a snowy New York while sitting next to my lit up Christmas tree. Not only was it cozy, but I preferred the tighter, shorter experience of Miles Morales compared to Spider-Man. And now I can do it all again since the game is coming out on PC, which means I can play it on my Steam Deck too. But how well does it run on it, and can my mid-range PC handle it too? Well, that's what this review is for. Now, this will all be from the perspective of a casual PC gamer. I won't be diving deep into precisely what frame rates I managed to achieve. Rather, I'll be focusing on what the experience is like without tweaking too many settings, and how it looks and runs, and what settings I've found to be best to use on my PC and deck. So let's start with my PC, which has 16 gigs RAM, a Ryzen 5700G, and a Radeon RX 6600 XT graphics card. The game defaulted to high settings, and I didn't have to adjust much from there. I was able to play in 1440p on high quality and could hold 60 FPS or above most of the time. The odd frame drop would hit when in highly populated areas like Times Square or when swinging at high speeds, but it wasn't too noticeable. To ensure I didn't drop below 60 FPS, I turned on AMD FSR 2.1 and switched it to the quality mode, and it gave me that extra bit of stability I needed without too much of a graphics hit. On FSR, balance still looked fine, but once I changed it to performance, it looked awful with some interesting artifacts around Spider-Man and the screen looking like a giant smudge. If I had to choose between performance FSR with 60 FPS or quality FSR at 30 or 40 FPS, I would definitely choose the latter. I got similar results with IGTI performance-wise. On performance mode, IGTI looks better than FSR in my opinion, but once you bump it up to quality, then I don't really notice much of a difference between IGTI and FSR. As for XESS, there was a noticeable shimmer effect when diving towards the ground, and it was very distracting, so I stuck with AMD FSR for my playtime. Playing through the game on my PC was a blast. I even tried out mouse and keyboard controls for a bit, but as you might expect, this game was made for controller. There are certain button combinations that feel very awkward on the keyboard. To do stunts in the air, you have to hold T while moving with WAS and D, so trying any trick that you need to spin right for was extremely cumbersome. It's certainly playable with a mouse and keyboard, but a controller is the way to go with this, regardless of how weird Xbox button prompts will look. But let's be real, I know why you're here. You want to know how well it runs on the Steam Deck, and I'm happy to report that it runs very well. Once again, I wanted to just load up the game, jump in and get playing. And the deck defaults to medium graphics with FSR on, and you can tweak different settings to optimize it for the deck, but the out-of-box experience is perfectly playable. Now obviously upscaling a 1280 by 800 screen to a 1080p video is going to make it look a lot worse than what you can actually expect. And my face lit up when I started swinging through New York at a mostly stable 30 FPS. As a massive fan of the Switch and PS Vita, this is exactly what console quality games in a handheld form factor mean. And come to think of it, Sony has supported the Steam Deck with more great games than they ever did with the Vita, and I love it for that. There was the odd frame rate hitch while swinging at high speeds, but I barely noticed it. In combat, with loads going on, it stayed stable too. Where it falters though is with big crowds, such as this crowded market where it struggled to stay at 30 FPS. This was a slow story section, so the frame rate dropping wasn't all too big an issue, and once I returned to fighting some bad guys, it was stable. Overall, the deck is my preferred way to play. On the smaller screen, the game looked amazing, and ultimately is significantly sharper than what you are looking at right now blown up to 1080p. While there are some issues like blur around Miles, it's hardly noticeable when swinging around, and let's be honest here, I'm just in awe that I can actually play a game like this in handheld. The battery life was pretty rough though, only lasting for just over an hour on decent brightness, which is exactly what I'd expect. But with all that technical stuff out of the way, how does Miles Morales hold up as a game? Very well actually, as it turns out, at least for a first time player. Swinging around New York, kicking the crap out of groups of bad guys never gets old. It's one of the most satisfying loops in an open world game I have ever played. And coming from Gotham Knights, it's crazy how good this combat system feels. After 10 minutes I was reminded of how good a superhero game can actually feel to play, and I find myself booting up the deck and just swinging around for 15 minutes. In comparison to Spider-Man PS4, I prefer how much tighter this experience is. There's very little bloat and the game can be finished within 10 hours. Some people will see that as a negative, and while I completely understand that point of view, I prefer this more streamlined approach. Not only is the game tighter, but I also prefer Miles as a character too. He's a bit more naive than Peter Parker, and I enjoyed seeing him grow into the role of Spider-Man as the game progressed. And his awkward quips will never get old, no matter how cringy they are. On the whole, the game is very cliche and the character arcs are very predictable, which I guess is common for superhero stories. The combat is much improved in Miles Morales too. In the first game, there was a heavy reliance on gadgets that I found to be quite boring. But in this game, you only have a handful of gadgets and instead have Miles' new Venom powers, which are extremely satisfying to pull off. And I think the impact of these Venom powers combined with his maneuverability makes this easily my favourite Arkham style combat system. But while I still enjoy the game on a second playthrough, it did turn into a bit of a slog due to how slow the game can be at times. Although zipping around the city is fast, the cutscenes certainly aren't. And this is all down to the fact that I know exactly what was going to happen, and it made this rather tiresome to replay. The opening few hours were also bogged down with some mandatory tutorials for things that I already knew, like how to fast travel or upgrade your suit, and this felt annoying even upon my first playthrough, and it's even more the case now. I can imagine that these tutorials are due to the fact that Spider-Man not only appeals to hardcore gamers, but also more casual fans that don't understand games as well as you or I do. So while I found it annoying, I think it's a necessary part of the process for these mass appeal games. At the end of the day, it's still a checklist open world game. You have caches to find, movement and combat challenges, and a few other things to waste some time on. They're quite basic, but the gameplay loop is so good that it gets away with these menial tasks. As I said, the shorter experience made checking off the list significantly more manageable. Bottom line is, Miles Morales on PC is a no-brainer if you want some Spider-Man goodness on the go, especially if you've never played the game before. However, I wouldn't recommend double dipping if you want to re-experience the game, unless you have an absolute monster of a PC and want to play the game at native 4K 60 FPS with ray tracing. So if you don't have that, I would stick to the PS5 version. Not only that, but I think the game is rather slow in a second playthrough, and I found it hard to replay the game because of that. Regardless, Miles Morales is still a must-play for any superhero or open world fan, and I like it a lot. There we have GameXplain's review of Spider-Man Miles Morales on PC. We just did a whole load of content on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, so check that out on the right, and I'll also leave our God of War Ragnarok review there for all you PlayStation fans. I really appreciate your time, and I'll see you all in the next video.